Most people think muscle cars came from Detroit, built by engineers in corporate towers and rolled off assembly lines with factory warranties and corporate approval. That's the sanitized version of history. The truth is that some of the most legendary American muscle cars were built in defiance of Detroit, created by rebels who didn't wait for permission and didn't care about corporate policy. This is the story of how one Chevrolet dealer in a small Pennsylvania town became more famous than most factory performance divisions, how he built cars that GM said couldn't exist, and how his name became synonymous with the most extreme Camaros ever to wear a bow tie. His name was Don Yenko, and between 1967 and 1972, he transformed ordinary Chevrolets into supercar-slaying monsters that terrified the competition and made insurance companies reconsider their career choices. The Yenko Camaro wasn't just a modified car, it was a middle finger to corporate bureaucracy, proof that passion and engineering could overcome policy, and evidence that the best ideas don't always come from the biggest companies. These weren't subtle machines with discreet badging and refined manners. They were loud, violent, uncompromising performance cars that existed for one purpose: to absolutely demolish everything else on the road. And here's the most remarkable part. They were completely street legal, sold through a Chevrolet dealership, and came with full factory warranties. GM never officially sanctioned them, but they couldn't stop them either. This is the story of how one man built an empire on Chevrolet's parts, created a legend that survives 50 years after the cars were new, and proved that sometimes the best way to change an industry is to ignore the people running it. To understand the Yenko story, you need to understand Don Yenko himself. Born in 1927 in Bentleyville, Pennsylvania, Don grew up in a family that understood automobiles and business. His father owned Yenko Chevrolet, a small-town dealership that served the working-class communities south of Pittsburgh. But Don wasn't interested in just selling Chevrolets to families who needed reliable transportation. He wanted to race. Throughout the 1950s, Don Yenko competed in Sports Car Club of America road racing, driving Corvettes and other American sports cars against the European machinery that dominated the series. He was good, winning races and earning respect from competitors who initially dismissed him as another rich kid playing at racing. But Yenko understood something that many racers didn't. Racing success could sell cars, and selling cars could fund racing. When his father retired and Don took over Yenko Chevrolet in the early 1960s, he had a vision. The dealership would become a performance destination, a place where serious enthusiasts could buy cars that weren't available anywhere else. He started modifying Corvairs, stuffing larger engines and performance parts into Chevrolet's rear-engine compact, creating the Yenko Stinger that competed successfully in SCCA racing. But the Corvair's days were numbered, killed by Ralph Nader's crusade and changing market preferences. Yenko needed a new platform, and in 1967, Chevrolet handed him the perfect canvas, the first-generation Camaro. The Camaro arrived in showrooms in September of 1966 as Chevrolet's answer to Ford's phenomenally successful Mustang. It was a handsome car with good proportions and decent performance, but GM's corporate policy created a problem for enthusiasts who wanted maximum power. That same policy we've discussed before, the one limiting intermediate and compact cars to 400 cubic inches, applied to the Camaro as well. The largest engine officially available was the 396 cubic inch big block, rated at 375 horsepower in its hottest L78 form. This was respectable power, but it wasn't enough to dominate the street racing scene or win consistently at drag strips. Yenko looked at the Camaro and saw potential. The engine bay was large enough to accept Chevrolet's 427 cubic inch Mark IV big block. The chassis was strong enough to handle the power. The only thing preventing this combination from existing was corporate policy, and Don Yenko had never been particularly concerned with following rules he considered stupid. In late 1967, Yenko began a program that would define his legacy. He ordered Camaros from the factory equipped with the base inline-six engine, the cheapest possible powertrain. When these stripped-down cars arrived at his dealership, Yenko's technicians pulled the six-cylinder engines and replaced them with L72 427 cubic inch V8s, producing 425 horsepower. They installed heavy-duty transmissions, upgraded rear axles, added performance exhaust systems, and bolted on hood scoops for clearance and intimidation. The finished product was the Yenko Camaro, a machine that shouldn't exist according to GM's rules, but was absolutely real and absolutely devastating. The first-year Yenko Camaros were relatively small-scale operations, perhaps 54 cars built in 1967 and 1968 combined. These early conversions were labor-intensive and expensive. Each car required hours of work to remove the original engine, modify the engine bay as needed, install the big block and its supporting components, and ensure everything functioned properly. The process wasn't cheap. A base Camaro cost around $2,500. The L72 engine and necessary parts added thousands more. Labor costs piled on top. By the time a customer drove away in a Yenko Camaro, they'd spent close to $4,500. Serious money in the late 1960s when average annual income was under $8,000. But for that money, you got a car that could humiliate anything Ford or Chrysler offered. The 427's torque was simply overwhelming in the relatively light Camaro body. Where a factory big block Camaro with the 396 felt quick, the Yenko with its 427 felt violent. The additional 31 cubic inches and 50 horsepower made a bigger difference than the numbers suggested. More importantly, the Yenko Camaro had cachet. These weren't just fast cars, they were rare special machines built by a racer who understood performance. Buying a Yenko meant joining an exclusive club, owning something your neighbors had never seen. The Yenko conversion process in those early years was straightforward, but required expertise. Technicians at Yenko Chevrolet had to ensure the big block installation didn't create problems with steering clearance, exhaust routing, cooling system capacity, or driveline strength. The L72 engine produced tremendous torque that could destroy weaker transmissions and rear axles. Yenko specified Muncie 4-speed manual transmissions with close ratio gearing for maximum acceleration. The rear axle received positive traction, limited slip differential, and gears chosen based on the customer's intended use. Highway gears for street cruising, numerically higher gears for drag racing. The suspension was upgraded with heavy-duty springs and shock absorbers to control the car's weight distribution and prevent axle hop during hard launches. The brakes, while upgraded from base Camaro specification, were still marginal for the car's performance. This was a 1967 Chevrolet, not a modern performance car. Stopping power was adequate for normal driving, but faded quickly during repeated hard stops. The interior remained mostly stock, though Yenko added his own badging and sometimes upgraded the seats and gauges. These weren't luxury cars, they were purpose-built performance machines that happened to have license plates and turn signals. What separated Yenko's operation from countless other dealers doing engine swaps was attention to detail and quality control. Don Yenko's racing background meant he understood that half-finished work created problems. Every Yenko conversion followed documented procedures. The technicians who performed the work were experienced and skilled, not random mechanics grabbing overtime hours. Each completed car was test-driven to ensure proper operation before delivery to the customer. This quality focus meant Yenko Camaros had fewer problems than comparable conversions from less careful dealers. When you bought a Yenko, you got a car that worked properly, not a science experiment that might grenade its transmission on the drive home. This reliability built the brand's reputation and created customer loyalty that translated into repeat business and referrals. Word spread through the performance community. If you want a serious street machine that won't leave you stranded, go to Yenko. The breakthrough came in 1969 when Yenko convinced Chevrolet to help him build Yenko Camaros on a larger scale using the COPO system. The central office production order process, the same backdoor that created the ZL1 Camaro and other special Chevrolets, allowed Yenko to order factory-built Camaros equipped with the L72 427 big block, something that supposedly couldn't be done under corporate policy. COPO 9561 made it possible to order a Camaro with the iron block 427, Muncie 4-speed transmission, 12-bolt rear axle, and heavy-duty suspension direct from the factory. Yenko placed an order for 201 of these cars, the minimum required to make COPO processing worthwhile. When the cars arrived at Yenko Chevrolet, they already had big block power. Yenko's role shifted from engine swapper to customizer. His technicians added distinctive graphics packages with bold Yenko/SC lettering on the rear panel, where SC stood for supercar. They installed Stewart Warner gauges to replace the sometimes unreliable factory instruments. They added hood scoops that were more decorative than functional, but looked aggressive. They tuned the carburetors for optimal performance and adjusted the suspension for better weight transfer during acceleration. The finished 1969 Yenko Camaro was a turnkey supercar that could run 13-second quarter miles bone stock and dip into the 12s with minor modifications and drag radials. The 1969 Yenko Camaro represented the peak of the concept. These COPO-built cars had factory quality control, proper assembly, and none of the potential issues that sometimes plagued the earlier hand-built conversions. The L72 427 produced 425 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 460 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM, using the gross rating method that measured output without accessories or exhaust restrictions. Real-world output was close to these figures, making the Yenko Camaro one of the most powerful production-based cars available. The performance was shocking by 1969 standards. 0 to 60 miles per hour required roughly 5.5 seconds. Quarter-mile times fell in the 13.2-second range at over 108 miles per hour with an average driver, and experienced racers could dip into the high 12 with proper technique. The car pulled hard from any speed, the big block's torque making passing maneuvers effortless and acceleration addictive. But the Yenko wasn't just about straight-line speed. The suspension upgrades and weight distribution gave it handling that surprised people expecting a nose-heavy pig. The Camaro's chassis fundamentals were good, and Yenko's enhancements made it even better. With modern radial tires, 1969 Yenko Camaros can surprise modern sports cars on twisty roads, though the manual steering and vintage brakes require skill and courage to exploit fully. The graphics package that adorned 1969 Yenko Camaros became iconic in its own right. The bold Yenko/SC lettering across the rear panel was visible from blocks away, announcing the car's special status to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Side stripes ran along the rockers, and Yenko badges replaced some factory Chevrolet emblems. The graphics weren't subtle, but subtlety wasn't the point. These cars were meant to be noticed, to stand out, to make statements. The visual package worked perfectly with the aggressive stance created by the heavy-duty suspension and wide tires. A Yenko Camaro looked fast sitting still, and the appearance wasn't false advertising. The car could back up every visual promise with brutal performance that left competitors scrambling for excuses. The graphics also served a practical purpose. They identified genuine Yenko cars and made counterfeiting more difficult. In an era before VIN and databases and online verification, the distinctive appearance helped buyers identify real Yenko products versus ordinary Camaros with fake badges. The 1969 model year also saw Yenko expand beyond Camaros. He applied the same philosophy to other Chevrolet models, creating Yenko Chevelles with LS 6454 engines, and even Yenko Novas, the ultimate sleeper muscle car. The Nova was Chevrolet's compact, a car that looked like your grandmother's grocery getter. But with a 427 or 454 under the hood, the Yenko Nova was a street racing legend. A car that looked completely innocent until the light turned green and it vanished in a cloud of tire smoke. Yenko understood the appeal of sleepers, of cars that didn't advertise their capabilities, but simply destroyed the competition. The Nova embodied that philosophy perfectly. A total of 37 Yenko Novas were built for 1969, making them even rarer than the Camaros and far more valuable today. But the Camaro remained the flagship, the model most closely associated with the Yenko name, and the car that defined what the dealership represented. The Yenko Chevelle program deserves special mention because it demonstrated Don Yenko's willingness to chase performance regardless of platform. The Chevelle was larger and heavier than the Camaro, making it less nimble but potentially more devastating in straight-line acceleration. Yenko ordered Chevelles through COPO channels equipped with the LS 6454, the most powerful production engine ever installed in a GMA body. With 450 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque, the Yenko Chevelle was a tire-shredding monster that could run quarter miles in the low 13s bone stock. The combination of the LS6's brutal power and the Chevelle's slightly better weight distribution compared to the Camaro created a drag racing weapon that dominated street and strip competition. Only 99 Yenko Chevelles were built, making them rarer than the Camaros and highly prized by collectors today. These cars proved that Yenko's magic wasn't limited to one platform, but could transform any Chevrolet into something special. For 1970, Yenko faced a challenge. Chevrolet had finally rescinded the engine displacement limits for intermediate and compact cars, meaning the LS 6454 with 450 horsepower was now officially available in Camaros through normal channels. The Yenko Camaro's reason for existing had seemingly evaporated, but Yenko adapted. He ordered COPO Camaros equipped with the LT1 small block engine, a 350 cubic inch V8 with solid lifters, 4 bolt mains, and 360 horsepower. These engines were more affordable than big blocks, revved higher, and weighed less, improving handling balance. Yenko added his graphics and touches, creating a Yenko Camaro that emphasized balanced performance rather than just brute force. Only 8 LT1 Yenko Camaros were built for 1970, making them among the rarest Yenko products ever. The market for high-performance cars was collapsing under the weight of insurance costs, emission regulations, and changing cultural attitudes. The party was ending, and even Don Yenko couldn't stop it. The transition from big block to small block Yenko Camaros reflected broader changes in the performance market. Insurance companies had made big block cars nearly impossible to insure for young drivers, but small blocks still carried reasonable rates. The LT1 engine offered respectable performance without the insurance penalties, making it a smarter choice for buyers who actually intended to drive their cars rather than trailer them to events. The LT1 Yenko Camaros were more refined than their big block predecessors, smoother at idle, easier to drive in traffic, and more responsive at high RPM. They represented a maturation of the Yenko concept, acknowledging that raw power wasn't everything and that balance mattered. But the market didn't care about nuance or sophistication. Buyers who wanted Yenko Camaros wanted big blocks and brutality, and when that wasn't available, they stopped buying. The 8 LT1 cars built for 1970 were likely 8 more than the market wanted. The 1971 and 1972 model years saw minimal Yenko Camaro production as the muscle car era died. Insurance companies had won their war against high-performance cars, implementing surcharges that made powerful vehicles financially impossible for young buyers. Federal emission regulations strangled engines, forcing manufacturers to reduce compression ratios and detune camshafts. The horsepower numbers that had climbed throughout the 1960s began a rapid descent that wouldn't reverse for decades. Yenko built a handful of cars in these final years, but the magic was gone. The cultural moment that made Yenko Camaros possible and desirable had passed. Don Yenko shifted his focus back to racing and to other business ventures, though Yenko Chevrolet continued operating. The dealership still sold performance parts and did modifications. But the era of the turnkey Yenko supercar was over. Between 1967 and 1972, approximately 500 Yenko Camaros were built, along with smaller numbers of Chevelle and Novas. 500 cars out of millions of Camaros produced during those years. It was a tiny fraction of production, but the impact far exceeded the numbers. The genius of the Yenko operation wasn't just the cars themselves, it was the business model Don Yenko created. He proved that a small dealership could become a performance brand, that modifications done right could add value rather than destroy it, and that enthusiasts would pay premium prices for special vehicles that offered something the factory wouldn't provide. Yenko wasn't the only dealer doing conversions in the muscle car era. Nicky Chevrolet in Chicago, Motion Performance in New York, and others created their own versions of super Chevrolets. But Yenko became the most famous, the name that enthusiasts remembered and collectors pursued. Part of this was Don Yenko's racing credentials, which gave his cars credibility. Part was the quality of the conversions, which were done properly rather than slapped together. Part was the marketing, with distinctive graphics and badging that made Yenko cars instantly recognizable. And part was simply timing and luck, being in the right place with the right product when the muscle car era peaked. Don Yenko's racing background informed everything he built. He understood that reliability mattered as much as power, that handling was important even in straight-line performance cars, and that attention to detail separated great cars from merely fast ones. The Yenko Camaros weren't just powerful, they were properly engineered. The engine installations were clean, the supporting modifications were appropriate, and the finished products worked as intended. This seems obvious, but many dealer conversions and aftermarket builds from the era were haphazard affairs that created as many problems as they solved. Yenko's racing experience taught him to do things right or not do them at all. This philosophy meant Yenko Camaros had better reputations than many competitor products, which helped build the brand and ensured long-term collectibility. The relationship between Don Yenko and Chevrolet was complicated and sometimes adversarial. On one hand, Yenko was a Chevrolet dealer selling Chevrolet products and promoting the brand. On the other hand, he was publicly demonstrating that Chevrolet's corporate policies were stupid by building cars the corporation said couldn't exist. Some people at Chevrolet appreciated what Yenko was doing, recognizing that his cars generated enthusiasm and sold parts. Others viewed him as a troublemaker who was making the corporation look bad by showing what was possible when you ignored the rules. The COPO system gave Yenko official sanction for his 1969 builds, but that approval came grudgingly after he'd already proven the concept worked. Chevrolet never advertised Yenko Camaros, never featured them in promotional materials, and maintained plausible deniability about the whole operation. This hands-off approach suited Yenko fine. He didn't need corporate help, he just needed them to stay out of his way and keep supplying parts. The street racing scene in the late 1960s gave Yenko Camaros their real-world testing ground and created the legends that still circulate today. Stories spread through the automotive underground about the Camaro from Pennsylvania that destroyed Hemi Cudas, the innocent-looking Nova that humiliated boss Mustangs, the Chevelle that made big block Corvettes look slow. Some of these stories were true, some were exaggerated, and some were complete fiction, but they all built the Yenko mystique. Street racers who encountered real Yenko cars learned quickly that the reputation was deserved. The 427's torque in the relatively light Camaro body created acceleration that felt like being rear-ended by a truck. From a roll, from a dig, from any situation, the Yenko pulled like nothing else. Winning street races built reputations, and reputations sold cars. Word of mouth was more effective than any advertising campaign could have been. When someone told their buddy about the Yenko Camaro that destroyed their car at a stoplight, that buddy started thinking maybe he needed a Yenko too. The customer experience of buying a Yenko Camaro was unique in the muscle car era. Most high-performance cars were ordered through regular dealers, arrived months later, and came with minimal explanation or support. Yenko Chevrolet operated differently. When you came to buy a Yenko car, you dealt with people who understood what you wanted and why you wanted it. The sales staff could discuss gear ratios, carburetor jetting, and launch techniques because they were enthusiasts themselves, not just salespeople moving inventory. When your car was ready, someone from the dealership explained how to drive it properly, what maintenance it needed, and how to get the best performance. This level of customer service was rare in the muscle car world and contributed to Yenko's loyal following. Buyers felt like they were joining a community, not just purchasing a car. That sense of belonging made people willing to travel hundreds of miles to buy from Yenko instead of getting a cheaper car locally. The drag racing success of Yenko Camaros helped build the brand and prove the car's capabilities. Numerous racers campaigned Yenko cars in NHRA, stock and super stock classes throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. The combination of factory-quality assembly and Yenko's performance enhancements created cars that were competitive right out of the box. With minimal modifications, headers, slicks, and carburetor tuning, Yenko Camaros could run deep into the 12s and break into the 11s, fast enough to win in their classes. These racing successes generated magazine coverage and trackside buzz that translated into sales. Every time a Yenko Camaro won at a major drag strip, potential customers took notice. The racing program wasn't just about trophies. It was marketing that paid for itself through increased sales and enhanced brand reputation. The Yenko Camaro also benefited from perfect timing in automotive history. The cars were built during the absolute peak of the muscle car era, when young buyers had disposable income, when insurance was expensive but not impossible, and when performance was the primary selling point for a whole generation of enthusiasts. 5 years earlier, the market wasn't ready. 5 years later, the market was dead. But between 1967 and 1970, everything aligned to make the Yenko Camaro possible and desirable. Don Yenko recognized this window and exploited it perfectly. He built cars that captured the moment, machines that embodied everything the muscle car era represented: power, attitude, rebellion, and the belief that more was always better. The Yenko Camaro wasn't subtle or refined or compromised. It was excessive, loud, aggressive, and unapologetic. Exactly what enthusiasts wanted. The decline of the Yenko empire came not from failure, but from external forces beyond anyone's control. The insurance industry's war on muscle cars, federal emission regulations, the oil crisis, and changing cultural attitudes toward performance vehicles killed the entire segment. Yenko Chevrolet survived by returning to its roots as a volume dealership serving normal customers, but the special performance conversions ended. Don Yenko continued racing through the 1970s and 80s, competing in various series and maintaining his passion for motorsports. Tragically, he died in 1987 in a plane crash at age 60, ending the story of one of the muscle car era's most important figures. His legacy lived on through the cars bearing his name and through the countless enthusiasts inspired by what he built. The collectibility of Yenko Camaros began building in the 1980s as the muscle car market revived. Survivors were rare because many Yenko cars had been raced hard, modified extensively, or simply worn out and scrapped. Finding an original numbers-matching Yenko Camaro with proper documentation became increasingly difficult. The cars that did surface commanded premium prices, well above comparable factory Camaros, because collectors recognized the Yenko name and wanted the exclusivity it represented. By the 1990s, Yenko Camaros were selling for 5 times the price of standard big block Camaros. By the 2000s, that multiplier had increased to 10 or 15 times. Today, a documented 1969 Yenko Camaro in excellent condition can bring $200,000 or more at auction. The rarest examples, such as the handful of 1970 LT1 cars, have sold for over $300,000. These prices reflect not just the car's performance or rarity, but their place in automotive history as symbols of an era when individuals could challenge corporations and win. The authentication of Yenko Camaros became a cottage industry as values climbed. Counterfeiters began creating fake Yenko cars by adding graphics and badges to ordinary Camaros, hoping to pass them off as genuine to unsuspecting buyers. The Yenko registry, maintained by dedicated enthusiasts, documented known genuine cars and helped expose fakes. Authentication required examining factory documentation, inspecting VIN numbers, verifying COPO codes, and confirming original equipment against known Yenko specifications. The process became increasingly sophisticated as counterfeiters got better at creating convincing fakes. Today, buying a Yenko Camaro without proper documentation and expert verification is financial suicide. The difference between a real Yenko worth $200,000 and a fake worth perhaps $30,000 makes authentication essential. This scrutiny has protected genuine cars and their owners while making the counterfeiting business less profitable. The Yenko story represents something important that goes beyond just fast cars. It's about entrepreneurship, about seeing opportunities that larger organizations miss, about having the courage to build something that established powers say can't exist. Don Yenko looked at GM's corporate policies and said, "Those rules don't apply to me," then proved it by building better performance cars than the factory offered. He demonstrated that small operations with focus and passion could compete with giant corporations, that the best ideas don't always come from boardrooms, and that sometimes the best way to change an industry is to simply do what needs doing and worry about permission later. This entrepreneurial spirit defined the muscle car era. While corporations built cars for the masses, individual dealers and small companies created machines for enthusiasts who wanted something special. The Yenko Camaro wasn't designed by committee or focus grouped or compromised to meet corporate average fuel economy standards. It was built because Don Yenko believed it should exist, and that purity of purpose created something memorable. The technical achievement of the Yenko Camaro shouldn't be understated either. Installing a big block engine in a car designed for a small block required solving numerous engineering challenges. The front suspension had to support increased weight without destroying handling. The steering system needed clearance around the larger engine. The cooling system had to dissipate the heat from an engine producing significantly more power than stock. The driveline had to handle torque loads it wasn't originally designed for. The brakes needed upgrading to stop the additional weight and speed. Yenko's technicians solved these problems through experience and testing, creating installation procedures that worked reliably across multiple cars. This accumulated knowledge was valuable, and it's one reason Yenko conversions had better reputations than many competitors. They simply worked better because someone had figured out the details. The Yenko Camaro also influenced Chevrolet's own product planning in subtle ways. When the COPO system was used to build Yenko's cars and similar dealer specials, it demonstrated demand for performance that corporate policy said didn't exist. This pressure contributed to GM eventually abandoning the displacement limits and offering factory big block Camaros. The Yenko cars and other dealer conversions proved the market existed, forcing Chevrolet to either serve that market or watch dealers and aftermarket companies capture it. In this way, Don Yenko and dealers like him pushed the factory toward better performance products. The relationship was sometimes adversarial, but ultimately it benefited enthusiasts by creating more options and better vehicles. The sound of a Yenko Camaro is something people who experienced it never forget. The L72 427 with its solid lifter camshaft idled with a distinctive lope, the exhaust burbling with an irregular cadence that announced this wasn't a normal car. Blip the throttle and the engine barked, the dual exhaust system amplifying every combustion event. Under hard acceleration, the sound transformed into a bellowing roar that built in intensity as the RPMs climbed, punctuated by the whine of straight-cut gears in the Muncie transmission and the howl of the rear axle under load. At full throttle, the noise was overwhelming, visceral, almost frightening in its intensity. Modern cars can match or exceed the Yenko's performance numbers, but they can't replicate that sound. Modern exhaust regulations, noise requirements, and refined engineering have eliminated the raw mechanical symphony that defined the muscle car era. The Yenko Camaro's sound was part of its appeal, an auditory signature that told everyone within earshot that something special was happening. The driving experience of a Yenko Camaro remains compelling even by modern standards, though for different reasons than contemporary performance cars. There are no electronic aids, no traction control, or stability management or anti-lock brakes to save you from mistakes. The connection between driver and machine is direct and unfiltered. You feel every input, every response, every fraction of available traction. The steering requires effort and provides limited feedback by modern standards, but there's a weight and mechanical feel to it that modern electric power steering can't replicate. The clutch is heavy, requiring leg strength and coordination. The shifter is notchy and mechanical, demanding deliberate movements and proper technique. The brakes require pressure and provide fade-prone stopping power that demands respect and skill. Everything about driving a Yenko Camaro requires attention and involvement. You can't text, adjust navigation, or fiddle with climate controls while piloting a Yenko. The car demands focus, and in return, it provides engagement that modern cars, for all their superior capabilities, often can't match. This involvement is why people who drive vintage muscle cars often prefer them to modern performance vehicles, despite objective disadvantages. The experience matters more than the numbers. The Yenko legacy extends beyond the cars themselves to influence modern automotive culture in ways both obvious and subtle. The idea of dealer special performance packages, of small operations creating special versions of production cars, continues today with companies like Hennessy, Shelby American, and others modifying modern vehicles. These modern tuners follow the template Don Yenko established. Take a good car, make it great, add distinctive branding, and sell it through select dealers to enthusiasts willing to pay premium prices. The business model Yenko pioneered is now standard practice in the performance aftermarket. Additionally, Chevrolet itself has occasionally built modern Yenko tribute cars, licensing the name and creating limited edition Camaros that honor Don Yenko's legacy. These modern tributes, while impressive, can't quite capture what made the original special. The contemporary automotive landscape is too regulated, too civilized, too safe to allow the kind of excessive, uncompromising machines Yenko built in the late 1960s. The story of the Yenko Camaro is ultimately about passion overcoming obstacles, about refusing to accept no from people who lack imagination, and about building something great because you believe it should exist regardless of what anyone else thinks. Don Yenko didn't wait for Chevrolet to build the Camaro he wanted. He built it himself, proved there was a market for it, and created a legend that survived long after the last car was sold. In an era when corporations increasingly control every aspect of product development and aftermarket modifications face legal and technical barriers, the Yenko story reminds us of a time when one determined individual could make a real difference. The Yenko Camaro wasn't just fast, it was proof that the best solutions often come from the people closest to the problem, that passionate individuals can accomplish things giant corporations can't, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore the people telling you something is impossible. Have you ever seen a real Yenko Camaro, heard one running, or maybe been lucky enough to drive one? Do you remember when small dealers could create legendary performance cars? When corporate policy was something to work around rather than accept? When passion and engineering mattered more than focus groups and regulatory compliance? The Yenko Camaro represents a moment in automotive history when such things were possible, when the muscle car era was at its peak, and when one Pennsylvania Chevrolet dealer proved that individuals could challenge institutions and win. These cars are more than just collectibles or investments. They're mechanical proof that entrepreneurial spirit and engineering excellence can create something that endures long after the original builders are gone. If you enjoyed this story about how one dealer created a legend, subscribe for more forgotten tales about the people, machines, and moments that defined American automotive history. The muscle car era produced countless stories worth telling, and the Yenko Camaro is just one chapter in a book that deserves to be remembered.